Deputies, good morning. We must start. Deputies, please. Deputies, welcome to the meeting today. If I can have your attention, please. The meeting today will conclude at 1 p.m. and I very much hope that as many deputies as possible will come down to Whitehall to pay tribute to Ajax and our ex-servicemen and women in the First and Second World Wars and conflicts since. The Ajax Parade is one of the most important and moving fixtures in our year, and I know that many deputies will want to join me in making clear our respects for those men and women who gave their lives for our future. Deputies, it's not easy to find the words to express our horror, our sadness, our anxiety, our utter disgust and condemnation at the murderous slaughter that Paris endured on Friday night. The casualties so far come to 129 dead and hundreds with serious injuries. Our thoughts and prayers are with the victims and their families. As you would expect, the board wrote to CRIF immediately after Shabbat, and we have had responses of appreciation of our solidarity with them, and you'll find the statement on the board's website. Deputies, a few thoughts that occur to me that we should restate today are these. First of all, no act of terror will alter our way of life and our determination to hold fast to the liberal, fair, free, and enjoyment of life that we hold dear in this country. Secondly, we shall remain resolute in our determination to oppose all forms of extremism. Thirdly, we will not allow ourselves to fall victim to emotive reactions such as blaming every Muslim. Fourthly, we will constantly stand by Israel, the only beacon of democracy and equal rights in a very violent and dangerous neighborhood. I also reflected that tomorrow, another form of extremist Islam will be coming to Paris in the shape of a visit from President Rouhani of the Islamic Republic of Iran. It's a very sobering thought that violent extremism, whether it comes from Islamic State or its rival in Iran, often starts with Jews, but it never ends with Jews. On Friday night, they didn't come for Jews, they came for other people. And Europe needs to wake up to the threat. And, dare I say it, and I'll mention this later, concentrate on the real threats instead of looking at ways of making life more difficult for Israel with such political nonsenses and distractions and bigotry epitomized by the EU labelling guidelines. Deputies, I've been sent a prayer by Anat Hoffman, which was read out recently at the American Union of Reformed Jury, biennial. And I think it's appropriate to read it, and I'm very happy to read it. I'm going to ask deputies to stand with me, and after reading the prayer, which I have amended slightly to fit the current circumstances, I will ask us to reflect for a few seconds on extremism and take our thoughts to those who have been bereaved and hurt in Paris. Eli, my God, at this time, give us hope for Israel and her future. Renew our wonder at the miracle of the Jewish state. In the name of the pioneers who made the deserts bloom, give us the tools to cultivate a diversity of Jewish expression in Israel. In the name of our fallen soldiers, give us courage to stand up to the words and ways of zealots, those in our midst and those among our neighbors. In the name of Israeli inventors who have amazed the world with their innovations, help us apply the same ingenuity to finding a path to peace. In the name of all these women and men, grant us the strength to conquer doubt and despair in Israel and in our own continent of Europe, replacing doubt with action and despair with hope. Ose shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. He who makes peace in his high places, may he make peace for us and for all Israel. And let us say, Amen. Thank you. I'm going to pass straight to the statement, and it's all there in black and white for you. I'm simply going to add a mazel tov to Martin Frey, who celebrated his special birthday last week, and I'm sorry to have to add a refuah shalema to Martin, and as deputies have been notified now, he has had to step down from his employment at the board. He is really not very well, and at the back there is a card which you can sign, and I hope as many of you will take the opportunity to do so. His wife Vivian has contacted me this week to say that they have received many messages of love and concern from deputies, which really, really touch them and the family, and thank you very much for that. And please continue to write, and those who haven't written, if they feel they would like to, please do so. I'd also like to add a refuah shalema to Herman Hirschberger, who I have heard is in hospital and unwell. I'll go quickly through the headlines, and anyone who wishes to say anything to me can do so. EU labelling guidelines. I hope you noted the board's statement, which was pretty robust on it, and that represents, I'm quite sure, both from the reaction I got just before and from, I think, your reaction today, the consensus of opinion in our community, although of course I accept that there are elements in our community who have different views, and that is their right. Can I just remind deputies, if you speak on one item, you probably won't get called again. Joe Millis.
Joe Millis, Bromley Reform. First off, thank you for reading out the prayer I sent you. That really was very, very moving. Second, regarding the EU labelling of produce from the occupied Palestinian territories, the Israeli occupied Palestinian territories from Israeli settlements therein, I think you will agree with me, Mr. President, that no Israeli government, not even the current far-right Israeli government, has ever annexed the occupied Palestinian territories. Therefore, the occupied Palestinian territories are not within Israel, and therefore any labeling of produce that as made in Israel is both misleading and wrong. I have no problem buying produce that is made in Israel, quite the opposite. But I think it's only right that produce that is not made in Israel is not labeled as such. And I think connecting that with the despicable act of terror in Paris on Friday is very far-fetched. And if you'll excuse me, Mr. President, I do not believe that this board needs to be a spokesperson for the Israeli Foreign Ministry. We need to have an independent voice that does not look as if it is only on the side of the Israelis. The West Bank is not part of Israel. Never has been, probably won't be. Even Israeli far-right governments recommend that.
Thank you, Joe. I think I've got your point.
Thank you very much.
All I'm going to say on that is that I think all of us recognise that this move from the EU to label has got nothing to do with consumer wishes and has everything to do with politics. And when we're talking about politics, the only point I made in my introductory words was that I think the EU would be well advised to look at rather more serious questions than trying to make party political points about whether East Jerusalem or any particular piece of land is or is not got any particular status. Yes?
Yaakov Schmidt, Western Great Synagogue. I don't want to comment on the previous speaker because I think it's very sad that one of us uses this kind of language here. I would like to point out something else. There was an interview on Ynet, an Israeli TV station that some of you might know, an interview with the Austrian ambassador, the newly elected or newly appointed Austrian ambassador to Israel. And as you might know, I was born in Austria and I carry an Austrian passport, so I take some interest in Austrian politics and the view of the Austrian government, which I think, in my view, has a special responsibility towards Israel and the Jews. And he was interviewed. In his interview, he commented on the labeling, and he said, original quote, "We have to call a spade, and this labeling is correct," and so forth and so on. I think it's pretty outrageous, and what I would like to suggest here is that all of us write to the Austrian ambassador, to the German ambassador, and to other ambassadors of the European Union, and we point out that while the European Union might take a certain view and might decide, it's still up to the individual governments to actually disagree. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to write to the Austrian ambassador here in London, whom we know, and you know Jonathan and Richard, we met with him, and I'm also going to write to the Austrian foreign minister, who was in London 2 weeks ago, as well as to the Austrian ambassador to Israel, to point out that I beg to differ, and I think it's a disgrace that Austria, which is a special responsibility, acts in that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakob. Jonathan?
I'd just like to repeat what Sir Ivan Lawrence said here many meetings ago. It is not correct to say they're occupied Palestinian territories. They are administered territories. You can call them occupied territories if you like, subject to agreement between the parties. So the use of these terms, unfortunately, spreads libels against hundreds of thousands of Jewish people. The whole issue here, again, has been, it's almost Goebbels-like, this continuous about illegal occupation. The fact is that the settlements were voluntary. Nobody was forced to go. And for countries like all over the world, Russia occupies Mongolia, China occupies Tibet, etc., and the British have all over been half the world. This is and what I'm very upset about, the previous questioner in his question said it is assumed the fact that the people who are killed in this terrible attack on some Palestinians in the middle of a Palestinian
Jonathan,
area.
I think we have your point. Can we move? We've really pressed
my
the
point
time.
is this: it is assumed that they were done by Jews, and this you cannot assume. This is again a libel. I'm sure if they were Jews, they would have been brought to trial.
We're talking about labelling.
Yes, I
Gary
know,
Mond,
but
Gary
the
Mond,
misuse
please.
and the misuse
Jonathan,
of language.
please take your seat. Gary Mond.
Yes, Mr. President, Gary Mond from the JNF. Firstly, many congratulations on your statement just now. I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head with everything you said. Like tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of other people, I have put a French flag on my Facebook profile. It's been interesting to see how many people have done that. I know that Marie van der Sil has done that. And people from all walks of life, from all political hues, have taken that action. In doing so, my sympathies are very much with the French people. They do not, however, extend to the French government. The French government seems to take far more interest in labelling settlement produce, in labelling produce from Judea and Samaria, than it does in looking after the welfare of its own people. We had the example just a few weeks ago when Bibi Netanyahu made a speech at the UN where he actually said that ISIS was a threat to the whole of Europe and France. And President Hollande said that was a joke. And until the French government takes these matters seriously and desists from spending so much time debating labelling of goods, it certainly does not have my sympathy, but the French people very definitely do.
Last point on this, Jerry.
Jerry Lewis, Hampstead Synagogue. When I last stood at this microphone, I said I was going off to Israel. I came back on Friday afternoon, just before Shabbat. First of all, I give greetings to all of you, from those that remember him from Ron Prosor, who used to be the ambassador here, and recently just came back from his stint at the United Nations, a very successful stint. While I was in Israel, the last week was dominated, of course, by the news of the EU decision. The EU decision has been a long time in coming. I spoke to a very high-level EU official based in Tel Aviv, and he made very clear to me that it's the EU which is sending a very strong message to Netanyahu. He cannot carry on his policies as he is at the moment. And that is something which has got to be borne in mind. However much we may defend the government of Israel for some of its policies, its settlement policy is no longer acceptable to the EU as a whole. He also asked me to tell you that the driver for these EU regulations is none other than Britain, the British government led by David Cameron. Now, I have watched David Cameron move from a position of not being very friendly towards Israel to being Israel's greatest supporter in this country. But I have to tell everybody here, the honest truth is, Britain is the main reason why these regulations have been introduced. We have got to send a message also now to Israel that Israel has to start listening to what world jury and world opinion is saying across the range. Netanyahu cannot carry on in the way he is because Israel will find itself more and more isolated. He's lost the friendship of Obama. He's going to lose the friendship of many other countries if he carries on in this way. I'm sad to say it, but that is the reality. Thank you.
No, that was the last point on that matter, I'm afraid. We're very pressed for time. There's just a couple of things for me, I'm sorry, you'll have to wait, Robert, for another occasion. There are a couple of points for me to respond to. First of all, for the record, Yaakov Schmidt was the questioner who didn't give his name and constituency. Yaakov, just remind me of your constituency. It's, is it? West End, great, thank you very much. I think that one of our reactions might well be, apart from writing to ambassadors, which I'm happy to endorse, is that if we see goods in supermarkets that are labelled from an Israeli settlement, we should go and buy them. Buy them, empty the shelves. I think we should also remember that if we want to support Palestinians in the disputed territories, I prefer the term disputed territories because everyone can agree with that. If we want to support Palestinians in disputed territories, then let's buy the goods that they produce and which give them their jobs and livelihoods. I want to be pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel, and that's how to do it. Gary Mond, can I just say to you, Gary, I had a long talk with my counterpart, the President of CRIF, Roger Kukiaman, a few days ago, and he said to me, the French government is doing absolutely everything it can, but it has a problem that is absolutely enormous. So let's not be too quick, please, especially right now, to condemn the government of France. And to Jerry, I say, I'm afraid that it's partly correct, that certainly from some quarters within the Foreign Office, they are driving this labelling, really terrible distraction, a waste of time, and something that is taking away our focus on the things that matter, which is the survival of our way of life. Terror in Israel. I want to remember now that on Friday, Rabbi Yaakov Littman and his 18-year-old son, Nathanael, were the latest victims of violence, deadly violence in Israel. And this was 4 days before Rabbi Littman's daughter is to be married this week. It's absolute tragedy that reminds us that the terror in Israel, all over Israel, is ongoing and has not yet ended. And that I hope that the prayer which I recited earlier, you will also have had in mind the peace in Israel. Sir Gerald Kaufman, well, I think my language speaks for itself. I'm sorry to say that no apology has been forthcoming from Gerald Kaufman. He's a man who, I'm afraid, it's very difficult for me to think of words to describe. I don't really care whether he's Jewish or not Jewish. I recognize anti-Semitism when I hear it. And for it to come from anyone who is an elected member of Parliament is something which is appalling. And I think he's incorrigible. I'm going to move on, if I may. I want to say something also positive. The UK Jewish Film Festival has become one of the major jewels in the United Kingdom Jewish community's crown. I congratulate and commend it for its extraordinary festival, the best ever, more than 80 films, 120 screenings, several locations all around the country, and we sponsored Doe at East Finchley the other night when there was a rather good film about the board, which you can see if you go onto the website. I remember that it's only a year and a bit since the United Kingdom Jewish Film Festival was affected, or so it was intended to be affected, by the Tricycle Theatre. Well, hasn't the film festival moved on from that? It seems like ancient history now. So thank you to the Tricycle Theatre for your monumental failure and embarrassment, for which you won't recover in a hurry. But the UK Jewish Film Festival has gone to greater and greater heights. All strength to you. Congratulations. I've mentioned the World Jewish Congress and the 50th anniversary of Nostra Aetate, and I take the opportunity to repeat how strong and constructive relations are between the Catholic world and the Jewish people. I've made a point about Kristallnacht, where there was the 77th anniversary, and unfortunately, the point there has taken even greater resonance with the increased, continuing violence in Israel and the violence in Paris. We must always remember that when there is a threat to any minority, it threatens the foundations of society. And I would like to think that the world has learnt something from what happened in Germany, although sometimes I'm not so sure. And Martin Frey, I've already referred to. I have answered all the questions I hope that have been asked of me, except one, and I'm so sorry, Mr. Seymour from Edgware District Reform Synagogue. Is he here? Thank you very much. I'm sorry that my written reply didn't come into. The question that you asked me was how deputies could do something about the academics who thought it was a clever idea to put their names in the Guardian and call for a boycott. And the answer, which I think you've been sent, is that there was a special bulletin from We Believe in Israel, which explained a whole lot of things that you could do. And I would commend every deputy here, as I have many times before, to subscribe to We Believe in Israel. It's not a huge burden on your inboxes. You might only receive an email from them once or twice a month, but when you do, the things that they're asking you to do count. So I hope that's the answer. Now, if anyone wants to ask me a follow-up question to those questions there, now's your opportunity. Robert. Can you remember to give your name and constituency, not just that deputies here know who you are, but so that it gets into the record?
Robert Sachs, Belsize Square Synagogue. Mr. President, fellow deputies, I'd like to refer to the reporting of the terror attacks in Paris on Friday night. I listened to the BBC News at 10 o'clock, and it was followed by Newsnight. Time and again, reference was made to the attack on Charlie Hebdo. No mention was made of the attack on the kosher grocery store. Not on Friday night and not on Newsnight. The first reference I heard was when I switched to Al Jazeera after Newsnight, and they referred to the attack on the Jewish grocery store. This has been terribly underplayed, Mr. President, and I think once again we are being airbrushed out of history. Just as the murder of Jewish athletes at the 1972 Olympic Games has not been commemorated, too easily are we being allowed, and the world being allowed, to forget attacks on Jews simply for being Jews. Mr. President, I think it would be appropriate for the Board of Deputies to write to the BBC and to give the members of the Board of Deputies an address so that we can write to a responsible person and not simply receive an anodyne dismissal.
Thank you, Robert. You're on Ambad. We got the point.
President.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add anything on that point? Because I'd like to try and keep it. Robert, all I'll say to you is that I'm advised on my left and my right. I heard some of the news, and it certainly did refer to the attack on the supermarket, and I can hear, and I hear also views from the board. So I'm not sure about. Let me say this: I'm not sure I want to go on the attack on the BBC right at this sad moment, but I take the point on. Helen, do you?
Helen Salkany, Holocaust Survivors Centre representative. I asked a question about any current projects by the Board of Deputies relating to Holocaust survivors, and your answer helpfully was that there's a project with 6 Point Foundation, and that is to look for survivors who've lost touch with the Jewish community. I wondered how long that's been running and whether you had actually found any Holocaust survivors that you've been able to help.
I'm going to ask Sheila to answer because she knows the answer and I don't.
Hello? Yes, it's working. Yes, okay, thank you. We have a young lady called Anna Scanlon working with this, and she's actually funded for a year by the 6 Point Foundation. She's been very active. She comes into the board on a part-time basis, and she's been going to synagogues. She's been going to the Refugee Association. She's been up to Manchester, doctors' surgeries, trying to get in touch with people through their relatives, trying to identify these people. We haven't got a current update of how many people she has found at the moment, but it's something that we're working really hard towards, and I hope to have more information for you by the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm also told from Marie van der Zyl, Vice President, that she heard Sir Peter Bazalgette who's the government's, I think, new envoy for post-Holocaust issues, who said that survivors have been found and that matters are in train to work with them. But by all means, speak to Sheila and Marie afterwards for further clarification. Thank you. I know Rob Sassoon wanted to ask a question. Rob, are you there?
Rob Sassoon, Deputy for Lamud. Many deputies may be aware of the recent news stories regarding the anti-Semitic abuse that was received online by one of our very own deputies, Izzy Lenger, who is one of the deputies for UJS and also the education officer at the Students' Union at the University of Birmingham. She put on Twitter a photo of a poster that was put up outside the university library with a photo of Hitler on it saying Hitler was right. Thankfully, these instances are very rare on our campuses, and we can only hope that in the future they will be even rarer. So, would the President like to join me in congratulating Izzy on the exceptional handling of the abuse that she received online, and that this should be highlighted to deputies as a fantastic example of outstanding leadership within not only the Jewish community, but also the general student community?
Rob, the answer to that is yes. The board immediately came to the support of Izzy Lenger, and I salute the courage of a young lone university student who received a barrage of anti-Semitic abuse, almost certainly from the same right-wing factory somewhere in America that produced it against Luciana Berger last year. And Izzy, you are a great role model for us and students, and well done, and all strength to you, and the board has offered all support. Thank you very much. Oh, Izzy's not here, is she? I don't think she's a deputy. I think she's... Okay. Right, any other questions to me? I will, Ros. Yes, at the back. Name and constituency.
Jason Tates, Mill Hill United. I'm just referring back to your earlier comments on the Sir Gerald Kaufman's comments. I don't think I'd like to brush it under the carpet quite so easily. I'm not so surprised at the comments he made. He has a long track record of making comments like that. I am surprised at the paucity of response from the Labour Party and from the British Jewish community. I'd like to wonder whether you're satisfied with the response that the Labour Party has given to dealing with his comments, and what steps, if any, that you're going to continue making with regard to those comments.
On this issue? On Kaufman? Sorry? Flo Kaufman wants to speak on Gerald Kaufman.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Deputies, good morning. I just want to make a personal statement regarding Gerald Kaufman, and to make it quite clear to all of you and to everybody else who might be listening that in no way is he related, either familiarly, politically, or in any way. He has nothing to do with myself, my family, my husband, my children, and we want to make this absolutely clear, because some people, Gerald Kaufman himself at one time told me that he thought that some people thought I was his wife. Can you imagine it? Can you just imagine it? So I just want to make it quite clear to everybody here, no relationship whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you. I thank Flo Kaufman for that. Jason, I don't think we brushed it under the carpet. The truth is, the Labour Party has very few options available to it. Sir Gerald will never have any sort of office in the party. He's obviously has far too many years behind him for that. And he's known as a total dissident. The Labour Party could withdraw the whip or expel him from the party, but in recent years it's had one particular member of Parliament who defied the whip 239 times, and it didn't do anything to him, and his name is Jeremy Corbyn. We got a very firm statement from Jeremy Corbyn, which the board noted, and was appreciative of. They look at Gerald Kaufman with absolute exasperation. They never throw anyone out of the party, so far as I can see, and I'm not sure they're going to do more, but there wasn't a paucity of response, not from the board and not from the community. And I think they will find that the word Kaufman comes back to haunt them again and again. And of course, they're extremely well aware of the concerns of the Jewish community. The Labour Friends of Israel will be having their annual lunch this week, and we must see who's there and what is said. Any other questions? I will, yes, all right. I'm going to say Deanna Levine, Roger Winfield, Ros Pine. By all means, go and take your place at the microphone. Who's standing for election? Oh, I see. If we, okay. I'm advised that there is no rule to that effect, but it is convention. And furthermore, perhaps, I think Vivian may have said this once, that people who are standing for election, who then speak, often find that far from advertising their candidacy, it usually attracts an equal and opposite reaction against it. So I think with that warning, and not of course mentioning any names, if any of the three people waiting for the microphone wish to take better counsels and resume their seat, then that might be advisable. Roger.
Of course I'll withdraw. I stand by the convention. There was no intention to promote my candidacy, so I apologise for that, and I may speak later.
Deanna.
Thank you. Deanna Levine, Deputy for B'nai B'rith UK. When I read the President's statement, there was one item which I was a little bit curious about, and that was your meeting with the Pope. Then I read it further, and I saw that you mentioned it again. But while you said you had a brief conversation with the Pope, what made me so curious was what on earth it was about. So if you'd like to clarify just a little bit about your brief conversation, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Well, why don't you tell us?
Deanna, I think a wicked gremlin has taken control of me because I thought someone might ask me. I think I ought to say straight away that I did not say to the Pope, Good Yontif Pontiff, and he did not reply to me, Good Shabbos Lobos. I introduced myself as the President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews and conveyed that the British Jewish community's greetings to him and our appreciation at the strength of relations between Catholics and Jews, very much so in this country, and also that he had devoted his weekly audience at St. Peter's that day to the theme of Nostra Aetate and improving and solidifying relations with other major world religions, and pledged to renew the principles towards the Jewish people embodied in Nostra Aetate. Rosalind, you may be one of those standing today, so do have a care.
Can I speak or can I not speak?
You may.
Okay. Rosalind Pine, North Salford Synagogue. Can you please leave me alone and be quiet? Let me speak. Can we start again, please? I've got an irritant here on the right-hand side. Right. Mr. President, I'm told here by Jerry Lewis, the would-be president, that I shouldn't speak. Would you please clarify?
I've said you may speak.
Can I speak or can I not?
I've said you may speak, and please ask your question.
Thank you. The constitution of our board requires us to take such active steps as possible to promote Israel's well-being, security and standing. Now, it's rather troubling. There is a deputy that produced a survey, rather tendentious, which was actually found its way into the mainstream media. It looked awful because it sounded as if the whole of Anglo Jewry has set its sights against Bibi Netanyahu's policies. Actually, this survey was in direct contradiction of a much more reliable survey produced by the Jewish Chronicle some months ago before the Israeli election, which actually showed exactly the opposite. But my point is this right for Deputy to use the position of in the board to whip up incitement against the elected government of Israel to promote its own tendentious point of view? And I really urge everybody to read the report. It's actually risible, the way, the methodology, etc. But I don't think it's in keeping with what is required of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, it's very interesting. I would like to echo the sentiment to read the report that has been produced by Yachad. It repays a good read. It's about 50 pages, including the annexes, and I'm looking at some of it now. Of course, the headline story, which was reported in the mainstream press and elsewhere, was the sentiment that, and I quote, I've got it in front of me, "I feel a sense of despair every time Israel approves further expansion of settlements on the West Bank." If you look at the set of questions that was asked in that connection, you will find 5 statements. The others were: Israel's standing in the world is being damaged by its current approach to the peace process. There will be unstoppable pressure for sanctions against Israel if it continues to expand the settlements. The Israeli government is constantly creating obstacles to avoid engaging in peace negotiations, and I would be prepared to support some sanctions against Israel if I thought they would encourage the Israeli government to engage in the peace process. Now, I'm no pollster and I'm no expert, but I would have thought that if you put a set of 5 negative and frankly rather loaded statements before people, you might get a result which supports one or other of them, but isn't necessarily a very accurate or a very methodologically correct way of doing things. And if you use loaded words like despair and you don't give people any other options except negative ones, then for my part, and I stand to be corrected by the academics, I think this research does look rather suspect to me. I also want to say that I noted that it was funded by Yachad, so it wasn't an independent survey. Interestingly enough, though, if you look further in the report, you find many, many interesting facts and figures which might also have come as a surprise to the people who commissioned it. For example, if the Palestinians want peace, they must recognize Israel as a Jewish state, not just recognize Israel's right to exist. 70% of the respondents agreed with that, and only 18% disagreed. That is obviously a policy of the current government of the State of Israel, and no Prime Minister, as I recall before Prime Minister Netanyahu, has voiced it. Here's another one. Peace negotiations are pointless, as long as incitement against Israel is taught in Palestinian schools. 63% agreed with that statement, and 30% disagree with it. I think if you asked Yachad, it would probably not agree with that statement. Here's another one, and this will be my last one, otherwise we'll be here all morning. There is no credible Palestinian partner for Israel to make peace with. 60% in favor, 24% engaged. Well, I'm not sure how to correlate all these statements. I think they're a very, very mixed bag. In the end, I also noted that I think 71% of respondents, quite close to the JPR figure of 76% about 3 years ago, supported the best outcome that could be achieved for peace was a 2-state solution. So I think you might say there's something in the Yachad research for anyone, depending on where you want to look for it. And I'm not really qualified to judge whether the research is methodologically rigorous enough to pass academic muster or not. I'm personally not sure. But I do want to add this, and I think it's really important. The board voted by a decisive majority last year to admit Yachad as a member of the board. Yachad has a deputy sitting as a member of the board. Is it Amos Schonfield? I don't know if Amos is here, but you needn't say if he is. Every deputy who's admitted to the board under the Constitution has a perfect right to be here. Every deputy has a right to express their views. I was on the record, as you know, alone I think of the honorary officers then, of voting against Yachad's admission, but I'm going to support Yachad's right to say what they want. Because in the end, what we are as a board is about free speech. If most of the board disagree with the view of Yachad, and I recall very well the excellent debate we had about it last year, almost every deputy who lined up to say they supported the right of Yachad to come onto the board added that they strongly, in some cases very strongly, disagreed with Yachad's views. So let the Yachad deputy speak his mind. Let Yachad take their place amongst our community. We've got bodies out there who I strongly disagree with and some I strongly agree with, but let's be clear about this. In this Jewish community, we have a right to be heard, and I'm not going to be party to any attempt to browbeat, intimidate, or silence them. And Ros herself complained as she stood up that someone was trying to do it to her. Well, Ros, let me say it to you. You should be consistent and not try and prevent other people speaking. No, I'm not going to have, this is not a question and answer session. You can't come back to me, I'm afraid. I think that you've got to be consistent about this. Thank you. Yeah, who are? I'm going to allow 2 more questions in the time available. I see Eric Mooman. And yes, please. Who's that? Okay.
Eric Moonman, Belsize Square. I'm not going to get caught up in the political implications that you've described in some detail. I feel so much about the events in France. I find it very difficult to concentrate on some of the narrow issues affecting the Jewish community. And may I say, without any upset, is that I think we might have spent rather more time involving perhaps 1 or 2 members from the embassy here from France, and to give us guidance and to help us through a very difficult period. Jewish people are concerned not only with Israel, however important it is to all of us, but also the way in which terrible things happen throughout the world.
Mr. President, Lee Lewis, Watford United Synagogue. I think the thing I would just like to encourage deputies to do is read the survey, actually, which I've done from beginning to end. It's a long and complex document, and I think it repays reading for the various reasons you've said. Actually, what came out to me when I read it was that there is, amongst British Jewry, overwhelming support for Israel's existence, exasperation with some of the policies espoused by the Palestinian leadership, but also deep anxiety about some of the policies of the Israeli government. And I think actually that's probably quite an accurate barometer of Anglo-Jewish opinion, and I think we shouldn't simply dismiss it. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank Eric Mooman and Sir Lee Lewis for those comments. Sir Lee, I really do agree with much of what you say. I would like Sir Lee's kind of very, very distinguished background as a leading civil servant, and I would like to hear your voice, Sir Lee, more often in the board, and we have many deputies whose talents are hidden under a lot of modesty, and Sir Lee is certainly one of them. Eric, I hear what you say. We lawyers are familiar with the notion of a leading question. I think one always has to be very careful about leading questions. Well, that's the end of my statement. Thank you very much for those questions. I want to draw attention to the minutes of the meeting we held on Sunday, the 18th of October. The board has not received any notice of amendments to that, And since I don't see any here, I'm going to treat them as a correct record, and they will be entered into the record accordingly. Deputies, we now have about 15 minutes to devote to the election to co-opt 4 deputies onto the Executive Committee, of which I gave notice last week. All deputies should have a green ballot form, and the ballot boxes are going to be open now until 25 past 12 till we resume and we seat. I won't keep them open to the end of the meeting, otherwise people are going to keep on walking up and down. I suggest that those who wish to, understanding, may like to group themselves round one of the ballot boxes. Is there a ballot box at the back, can I see? Perhaps they might group themselves around 2 at the back, and people who want to fit a name to the face can do so, and then please cast your votes, and we will resume again. You'll have the chance to do a bit of networking and talking, and we resume again in 15 minutes.
On a point of order, Mr. President.
One moment, Jerry, if you will, please. Tony Leifer, Chair of Constitution Committee.
One more thing. It's usual for us to approve the appointment of a returning officer and 2 scrutineers, and those I propose are Jeremy Friedman as the returning officer and Rachel Savage and Gary Mond as the souvenirs. I hope that's acceptable. As these, what did I say? Oh, yeah. Okay, you can take them away if you want to, but otherwise they're scrutineers. Thank you.
On a point of order, Mr. President.
Yes, Jerry, quickly.
On a point of order.
Come on,
As
Drake.
the person who originated the idea of hustings, I know it is impractical to have hustings, but there are many deputies here who will not be familiar with those who are standing. Some are well known, some are not. Is it possible in the few moments we've got to ask each of those individual candidates just to stand individually so that each and every one of us can know what they look like, and it will be much easier for us to then vote?
Well, before you move from your seats, would those who are present and are standing care to stand up now and wave, and then...
So I said individually so we know who they are.
All right. Okay. Well, those who want to stand, did I see? Gabriel Webber, I see. You can wave. Sir. Sorry? Gary? Barry Shine. Sorry, Barry. Michael Sampson. Talofer. Emma. Thank you. Mike Samuels. Thank you. Naomi Zell. Yes, and yes. Karen Newman, thank you. Roger Winfield. Peter Baum. Thank you. Mark Fox. Is that everyone? Martin Rankoff. Have I missed anyone? Rosalind Pine. Please now go and cast your votes. Thank you. Ask the boss man. Well done. How are we doing so far? All right? Yeah, that was good. I've achieved all the things I wanted to do. Try and say something that was... Resume your seats. Thank you. Deputies, please. We do need to resume for the last 30 minutes of the meeting. Thank you. That's really kind of you to have me. Deputies, please. Yeah. It's check with the chair, but it's normally all right. But occasionally there are some confidential things on it. Okay? Right. Marie, do you want to go first? And make it quick, okay? Deputies, please, if you can resume your seats now. Thank you. Sorry? Oh, I don't need his name, don't worry. I'll just mention it's a member of the defence team, isn't it? Deputies, Deputies, please. Deputies, please. I see Denise Lester will be leading the contingent of deputies. Can I just mention with regard to the Ajax parade, I did hear a suggestion that there may be an attempt to gather regional deputies. Paul Edlin, I haven't had the chance to discuss this with you, in a coffee shop after the meeting, but I'm bound to say that must not detract from deputies being able to go to the parade, and I would ask you to think again about that. I've received word that Stephen Patterson, Member of Parliament, SMP, will in fact be marching this afternoon with the Scottish contingent at the parade, and I'm very pleased about that. That's another reason why regional deputies should be making their way to the parade and not hanging around afterwards. Denise, very quickly, if you would.
We certainly, I need to be there for 1:15, and really you need to be there 1:15 to 1:30. There's a 91 bus that goes to Trafalgar Square. You need to meet in Horse Guards Parade. We're marching promptly shortly after 1:30. So that's the timeline, please. And you need your marching orders. So I let you make, I'm going to leave. Whoever wants to join me can join me. Otherwise, please make your own way down there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I also
Mr. President, with deep regret, I have to raise a further point of order on your statement you just made. There is allegedly supposed to be a regional meeting taking place in Starbucks at the end of the board meeting. I've just discussed it with Paul. He says no regional deputy will miss out on the march. It is unheard of for the board to have a meeting immediately after our regular plenary, and I would urge everyone concerned, regional deputies, not to attend the meeting simply because they should be going and we should all be supporting the Ajax parade. Mr. President, could you please so rule? Thank you.
Okay. I think I'm told it's an executive meeting. Is that right, Paul? Do you want to say anything, Paul? Can you make it very quick? Because
Paul Edlin, Glasgow Jewish Representative Council. This meeting is a regional executive meeting. It will take about 5 minutes, and all members will be able to attend the meeting at the Ajax Parade. It is purely to elect a vice chairman of the regional council. Be very quick.
I'm going to Scotland in 2 weeks today at a meeting that's been arranged for me by the Glasgow Jewish Representative Council, whose deputy Paul Moron is here and chair, and thank you very much, Paul, and also by Skojek. Ephraim has been slightly unwell and not able to come. We wish him a refuah shalema. I shall be doing a full programme of events in Glasgow and hoping to meet politicians and leading members, I'm told, of the Church of Scotland. And Scotland is a very important part of the United Kingdom still, and the board takes part of its responsibility of Scotland very seriously, and I want to give every possible encouragement to the fantastic members of the community in Scotland who do so much in what is often a very hostile environment, and also encouraging them in return to give the board its maximum support. We're now going to have the reports from the divisions. Marie van der Sil will first present the report of Defence and Group Relations. And as in our new custom now, it's a brief report. Unless there's anything to add to it, all that will happen is that she will take questions on the issues concerned. Marie.
Thank you. As Jonathan said, I'm not presenting the report because it's written for you, so can we proceed straight to any questions? Yes, Susan.
Susan Pascoe, Nairstraw Community. Congratulations on your excellent report and all the excellent work you're doing.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask in connection with a report about the trustee of the Ghulam Mustafa Trust who claimed on the charity's Facebook page that Jews are recording every photo on their Samsung smartphones. And two questions. One is, are you liaising with a campaign against anti-Semitism on the work they're doing on this? And the second question is there room for any interfaith work here? You have a very impressive list on page 2 of your report of interfaith work being done. Perhaps there's scope here as well. Thank you.
I did actually provide some comment in the Jewish Chronicle about that. I don't know if you've actually seen that, because I think the crux of the problem is that the Charity Commission needs to have powers to remove charitable status from charities that are masquerading as charities when they're actually wanting to spread anti-Semitism. And also there needs to be powers for the Charity Commission to actually remove trustees. They don't have these powers, and there's a bill going before Parliament at the moment to be able to give them these powers. So we're liaising with the appropriate people in that respect. I'll take on board your comment about the campaign for anti-Semitism and interfaith, but I think this is also a regulatory issue. Thank you.
If there are no other questions to Marie, and of course she'll be available afterwards and on email, thank you very much indeed, Marie. Thank you for that excellent report. Next up will be Vice President Sheila Guob, Community Issues Division. Sheila.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Before I present or talk about my report, I would like to launch the board's Climate Change Challenge in the lead up to the, in Paris, COP21 climate change event at the end of this month, running into December. The papers should have been with you. The board, led by Bodza and Natan Levy, have decided to try for a 1-for-8 Eco-Hanukkah challenge. This would stretch 1 day's worth of fossil fuel oil consumption over all 8 days of Hanukkah. We think this is an amazing idea. The suggestions of the way you can do this are actually on this information sheet. I'm sure more will be available if anybody's interested to come and find out about it afterwards. Or Amanda and Stephanie from Bodza will be able to help you. But we've decided to take this challenge in the lead up to the climate change event in Paris at the end of the month. Thank you. Now, if there are any questions about my report, please.
Wow.
Okay, I'd just like to make a plea. We've had a Jewish tour bringing non-Jewish children in to northwest London. We had a very successful last Thursday. We have another one on Tuesday. We have volunteers in the Jewish community in London and in other places in the UK. I have to say that the lack of deputy presence amongst these volunteers is quite amazing. We have lots of people doing it, but not many deputies who sign up to do these tours. And if you'd like more information, we had one new person, Norma Don, came last week. Thank you, Norma, much appreciated. If you're not sure what it entails, get in touch with me. You can come along, you can see what happens, but it's the most amazing piece of work we do with GCSE students who are studying Judaism to GCSE level. Thank you.
Yeah. Amanda Bowman-Ruback.
Sorry, Amanda, hi. Yeah.
From Hampstead Synagogue. I just really wanted to take the chance to thank all deputies for bringing in socks and deodorants for shelter from the storm as part of our Deputies Mitzvah Day activity. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Sheila. I'd like to just say Sheila is absolutely indefatigable, making a huge amount of the very varied menu of the work of the Community Issues Division. She travels back and forth to Cumbria, where she's a representative on a very important SACRE. And last week, the board organised a marvellous conference of Jewish SACRE representatives from all over the country in Birmingham. And thank you for that. Huge amount of work going on under the surface there. Finance and organisation, Stuart.
Okay, is this mic working? Yes. Several of you have come up to me already today with various questions, and as we've established, an awful lot to do with the F&O's work is best dealt with offline, because it tends to be a lot of small things that cumulatively matter, but they tend to be quite detailed. And I'm really glad that none of you are leaping up, because I'd have you down as troublemakers. What I do want to do, however, is really thank Lawrence Brass, my predecessor, for providing some very solid foundations for the work we have been doing in the last few months. Things are moving in the right direction. The pleasant surprise has been not only the way in which so many members of the F&O who were mentioned in this report, several of them, in fact a majority of them, not only the way in which members of the F&O have stepped up with their time and their energy and their enthusiasm to help move things forward, but also the way in which, and not all of the questions that came to me in the last month or so from deputies are featured in this, the way in which so many of you have actually been making really constructive, well thought out, sensible suggestions and raising similar questions. I don't think there has been one time waster. It's wonderful. Please keep it up. On that note, I assume there are no questions, so we'll move on.
There being no question. Oh, Hester. Go on.
Hester, you're not a time waster, and I have regard for you, so please.
Thanks very much. I'm Hester Abrams. I represent the United Synagogues centrally, and I'm on the F&O this time. Actually, I think it's a tradition to say something like, this is my maiden speech this triennium, or something. Anyway, I'm just adding, thank you, Stuart, for noting that I am going to be working on marketing, PR, and fundraising. I think many of you will be as well. But the main point of news in Stuart's report is about the community contribution. And it is now called the community contribution and not the communal levy. So anytime you hear it, please just do the news speak of community contribution. You will hear much more about this, and I'm really only standing up because were it not for the Ajax Parade and the shortness of this meeting, we would be telling you a lot more about what we're hoping to do. But Stuart has made the point, and I just want to underline it, that we really want deputies to have conversations with their communities about the value of the board, and also about making sure that members understand it and are willing to pay, and then do pay. I'm holding two pamphlets, which Colin has prepared. I don't know whether you've actually seen these. They are very simple things about the benefit and the value of the board, and they are what we have now. We may have new ones, and we may have other messages to communicate. But if you need these to have your conversations in your synagogues and your other membership organisations, please ask for them and please use them. Thanks very much.
Cool.
Hester, thank you very much, and I'll second all of that. Just in the interests of balance, I'm holding up two forms of money here. I just want to ask, this saves me sending an email out, I just want to ask any of you who had expressed a firm and sensible interest in getting involved in looking at what we do with our small investment pot, to reaffirm that interest to me, send me an email, simply because we've got to the point where we're going to put that little working group together, that's all. Oh, and I'm really glad Ross has come back.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Senior Vice President, Richard, International.
Thank you, Johnny, and good morning, everybody. No introduction from me, but just two updates, because obviously the report was prepared before these two events happened. On labelling, Johnny has already covered, and on the horrific events of Friday night, obviously I want to echo Johnny's comments, and also Eric's before, about making sure that we are sending our condolences to the French embassy, which we are doing. And also we spoke with our counterparts, CRIF, the French equivalent of the Board of Deputies, yesterday to see how they're doing, and we're going to be speaking about any mutual discussions around our individual communities' security concerns. Are there any questions on the report? Please.
Jonathan Davis, Golders Green Synagogue. The labelling regulations demonstrate yet again the importance of decisions made at EU level on issues of key concern to this community. And I just wonder, in the light of that, whether we're satisfied that we are devoting enough priority and enough resource to liaising with, working with other EU European communities and lobbying adequately the European Union institutions.
Thank you, Jonathan. Are there any other questions? Yes, please.
I think the votes are in, so I'm going to reappear. Roger Winfield, LJS. This comes within your division, Richard, so I will raise it, although it's been discussed before. And that is the report which has been generally referred to today as the YACAD report, but more accurately, I think it would be best to refer to it as the Ipso Mori report and the City University report and YACAD's report, so put it in some context. It raises a number of interesting issues, and I wonder if you would be prepared to recommend to the President that he set up a working party to consider the report, how it impacts on the Board of Deputies' position on Israel, to prepare a report, then report to deputies. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, please, Alex. No, yeah, she was.
Alex Brummer, United Synagogue. I wanted to raise a couple of points regarding Paris with you, Richard, if you don't mind. The President mentioned the fact that that Rouhani is due in Paris this week, I think you said, Jonathan. I just wanted to reiterate the fact that we really need to focus very strongly on Iran and on the fact that Iran is a source of terrorism, and that there seems to be a willingness among the 5 big Western powers to lift the Iranian sanctions without any linkages to their work in terrorism, which they are supporting terrorism groups all around the world financially. They are a force for instability in Syria at the moment. And I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that when we're dealing with the Foreign Office and we're dealing with government officials, that we re-emphasize the need for some linkages between Iran's behavior in the rest of the world and the nuclear treaties which have been signed. The two cannot be separated. I'm also cognizant of the fact that, that the Chancellor of the Exchequer will be leading a very high-level British delegation to Iran in January or early in the new year. And I think we also ought to be alert that the rush to make new deals with Iran will fuel their economic prosperity and make them even more able to fund terrorist groups. I just wanted to make those 2 points. Just secondly, have I got another moment? Yeah. So secondly, on the refugee, again on the Paris events, we're all in this room very sympathetic to the case for the refugees. All I wanted to say was that we have to make sure that there is a separation between the issue of refugees and the issue of border controls, because clearly there seems to be some relevance in what has actually happened in Paris in that case. And just going back to the Second World War and the end of the Second World War, I'm cognizant that many members of my own family spent time 2 years in waiting camps, in displaced persons camps in both Germany and in Sweden before they were allowed to enter Western democracies or other countries. And we ought to be seeking a similar policy where there is some sort of filtering of who comes into countries before that actually happens. Thank you.
Anyone else before I address those points? Okay, so Jonathan, your question on EU concerns, absolutely right. Within the International Division, we have now set up a number of working groups so that we can divide up our work better. And one of those is specifically on the points that you're speaking to. So looking at both legislation that's coming out of the various EU bodies, whether that's in Strasbourg or Brussels or elsewhere, also thinking about which governments within the EU, and also thinking about, from our perspective here in the UK, which ambassadors we need to be liaising with to make those points. So point taken and absolutely in hand. Roger, in terms of the report that's been mentioned, absolutely. I think there's some very positive points in the report, and I would certainly urge everybody to take some time to read it. So it shows some things which we should be very pleased with. 90+% of the British Jewish community feel that Israel is a part of their identity. And I think that very much says to the BDS lot who try and divorce the two and split us into good Jews who don't like Israel and bad Jews who do like Israel. That's just demonstrably false. I think the data quite clearly shows that Israel is inextricably tied up with most people's Jewish identities. But there are also some points that should concern us all, and this is not a political point, but only 59% of respondents said that they were Zionists. So what's going on? What have we, as the British Jewish community organisations, not done well, if that's how people are feeling? So I think it certainly should be read by everybody, including my division. I don't propose setting up a separate group for it. I think the Jews love task forces and setting up groups of groups and groups and groups. I don't propose that we do that, but certainly the issues that this impacts on in my particular division, so whether that's Israel activism, for example, then certainly we all need to be aware of what the report says. Alex, two main points, one on Iran, one on the refugee crisis. It strikes me as very odd that Rouhani is celebrated as some sort of moderate. Any moderate whose state is busy sponsoring terrorism, not just against Israel, clearly, which concerns us all, but also, as we've seen horrendously on Friday night, potentially other places around the world as well. He's not a moderate, and anybody who is happy financing millions of pounds worth of terrorism around the world needs to be treated as such. So certainly that's something that we, the board, will remain vigilant against. On the refugee crisis, it's very difficult. I stood in a refugee camp just last week on the northern border of Greece. It is a very, very complex issue. On the one hand, as you rightly say, Alex, many of our own families' identities tied up with the fact that we were once refugees, and it doesn't matter so much how far back you have to go in your own personal family's genealogy. At some point, sadly, our people's history speaks to this, that we probably were forced out of where we were living once upon a time. So certainly an issue that resonates with the British Jewish community. On the other hand, of course, there are legitimate security issues here. We rightly have to assume and hope that our security forces are doing what needs to be done to keep them safe. I agree with you. That we need to be looking at border controls more closely in and around the EU. And a Greek government minister on Friday night, on Saturday, I think, not long after the attacks, pointed out the fact that potentially one of the passports that was found at the scene, should that be one of the terrorists who carried out the attacks, was a Syrian passport holder and had passed through one of the Greek islands. So certainly something that we all need to be vigilant about, whilst not then, I hope, demonising hundreds of thousands of legitimate refugees who are fleeing untold, as they told me, persecution from the Taliban in Afghanistan, from Iraq in ISIS and Syria, and other failed states around the world as well.
So I think we have to end now. I've just noticed Levi and his colleagues from Stamford Hill. I want to give you a warm welcome, if I may, Levi. I don't know if you were here earlier. I've only just noticed you. But on the way out, I hope deputies will take the opportunity to greet our colleagues from N16. And we're engaged in good discussions at the moment, which I hope will bring that members of that community much closer to the board and our discussions, because they are a very important and valued part of our community. Stephen, because we are running 2 minutes early, I'll give you 1 minute, and then I will be closing the meeting.
Stephen Games, Muswell Hill. Just for clarity, Richard, I wonder whether you can explain. We all know about the national bodies of Jews that represent their communities to their countries, CRIF in France, the Greek Jews Board of Deputies in our case. To what extent, can you clarify, is there an effective European body that talks directly to the European Union and that has the ability to address issues like the labelling situation, which perhaps could be better addressed by a European body than by constituent national representative bodies like our own?
There's one. Hello, microphone. Thank you for your question. There is one that I know of that we obviously engaged in, and we are one of the key players in the European Jewish Congress, for which Johnny is a vice chair. So very much plugged into that. Certainly, if that's something you'd like to discuss further, then pop up and have a chat with us, also known as the EJC. Thanks.
Moshe Kantor is the chair of that, who wrote a very good article in the Washington Post this week on labelling, and his voice is heard quite loud and clear. Deputies, I'm really pleased to be able to conclude this meeting on time. Can I also say, I really think it's to the credit of the whole board that we have held a focused, concise meeting with good questions, good debate. I think it's going out there live, live streamed, and something I only learned quite recently is if you go back to the board's website, you can actually relive it afterwards. It may not be as popular as Downton Abbey, but I do talk to people who tell me that they've watched us, and I hope and I think we have conducted ourselves well, and we're a marvellous exercise in communal democracy and transparency. I really would like to take the opportunity, especially for the newer deputies, to highlight and to thank the members of the board's devoted staff who work very hard, without whom I would not be able to do the job I do. And in no particular order, Gillian Meron, Chief Executive, is with other Chief Executives on a World Jewish Congress sponsored meeting of Chief Executives this weekend, so she isn't present. On my right, Phil Rosenberg, the board's Director of Public Affairs. Then just in order there, that's Jackie Geese. Who's Jackie? Was it Natalie? Jackie Emery. Sorry, Jackie. Is it Natalie? What? Diane Geese, whose name you've seen on many of your communications. Bernice Black, who's... Where's Jack? Where's Jack? He was here. Jack Thorpe Baker, who's very modestly gone at the back, who's my assistant and does many helpful things. And last and not least, Colin Spanjar. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to give you to show our appreciation. Deputies, by the time we next meet, Hanukkah will have been and gone, or will it be the last day of Hanukkah? On the 13th, the next meeting is on the 13th of December 2015. I would like, and there'll be a regional assembly, I think, on that day. I would like to wish all deputies a happy Hanukkah. May the lights of Hanukkah and the lesson of Hanukkah inspire us and hopefully bring more light into the world, less heat, and please God, an end to violence. Thank you very much indeed. The election result will be available on...